Back when I was in college, I started driving for Uber to survive financially. This was deep in Southern California, where the streets of Los Angeles never truly slept. At almost any hour, my phone would light up with another ride request. Drunk tourists, exhausted nurses, cheating husbands, lonely women escaping bad marriages. Eventually, I realized people confessed their darkest secrets to strangers because they knew they'd never see us again. One cold October night, a ride request dragged me far outside the city lights. The pickup location sat near Temecula's wine country, deep in the desert hills where the roads twisted through endless black trees. The GPS led me off the highway onto a cracked access road with no streetlights anywhere in sight. My headlights barely cut through the darkness. At first, I thought the app had glitched. There was nothing out there. No houses, no traffic, no sound except the dry desert wind scraping through the brush. I was seconds away from canceling the ride when I saw movement ahead. A woman slowly emerged from the darkness. She was tall, blonde, and dressed in an immaculate white pantsuit that looked absurdly expensive. The strangest part wasn't how elegant she looked. It was that she appeared to have walked miles down that dirt road in high heels without a single speck of dust on her clothes. When she opened the back door and slid into my car, an icy perfume filled the cabin. "Thank you for waiting," she said softly. Her voice was calm, too calm. As I started driving, I kept catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. She never blinked, not once, and even though she smiled politely the entire ride, something about her felt deeply wrong. The farther we drove from the highway, the more isolated the world became. The paved roads slowly narrowed into long stretches of cracked asphalt, surrounded by dead trees and empty land. My GPS signal kept cutting in and out, glitching like it didn't want to guide me any farther. Still, the woman remained strangely relaxed in the back seat. She asked me casual questions about college, money, and whether I liked driving at night. But every time I answered, I could feel her staring at me through the mirror with this cold, unreadable expression. Then she suddenly smiled. "You must see a lot of strange things out here," she whispered. I laughed nervously and told her, "Not usually." That was a lie. Something about the road already felt cursed. After another 20 minutes, we entered one of those massive rural neighborhoods where wealthy people hid enormous mansions behind forests and private gates. The houses were so far apart, they almost looked abandoned. Finally, the GPS announced that we had arrived, but the woman quietly said, "Keep driving." Ahead of us stretched a narrow private road lined with towering trees. A white ranch fence blocked the entrance, covered in faded warning signs. "No trespassing. Private property. Beware of owner." One sign showed a silhouette of a man holding a shotgun. I hesitated. The woman leaned forward slightly from the back seat. "It's fine," she said softly. "Just open the gate." My stomach tightened. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around. But before I could respond, I noticed something beside the fence. Metal signs riddled with bullet holes, Confederate flags, swastikas, symbols painted across rusted boards like trophies hanging in the darkness. The air suddenly felt heavier, and then, far down the hill beyond the gate, I saw lights moving in the dark. Flashlights, several of them, slowly coming towards us. The flashlights kept moving closer through the darkness. At first, I told myself they were probably just workers or people leaving a party, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something horribly wrong about that place. The woman's smile slowly faded when she noticed I had stopped the car. "Well," she asked coldly, "open the gate." I swallowed hard and stepped out into the freezing night air. The silence out there felt unnatural. No insects, no distant traffic, nothing. Only the sound of gravel crunching beneath my shoes. As I approached the gate, my headlights illuminated more signs hidden along the fence line. Some had racist slurs spray-painted across them. Others showed crude drawings of hanging bodies and threats written in red paint. One sign simply read, "We don't call the police." My chest tightened instantly. I looked downhill again. The flashlights were much closer now. I could barely make out several figures slowly walking uphill toward me. Their lights bobbed through the darkness like flowing eyes. That was enough for me. I hurried back to the car and told the woman, "Look, I'm sorry, but I don't think my car can handle the hill past the gate." Her entire demeanor changed immediately. The sweetness disappeared from her face like a mask falling off. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "It's right there." Her voice no longer sounded friendly. It sounded angry, desperate. I explained that the app location technically ended farther back on the main road, but she kept interrupting me louder and louder, demanding I drive her down the hill. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The people with the flashlights had stopped walking. They were standing perfectly still near the bottom of the hill, watching us. Every single light pointed directly at my car. The woman suddenly leaned forward between the seats. "You need to finish the ride," she whispered. Something about the way she said it didn't sound like a request. It sounded like a warning. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The woman kept staring at me from the back seat with this furious, almost lifeless expression. The friendly businesswoman from earlier was completely gone. Now she looked like someone cornered, or someone trying very hard to keep me from escaping. "You're seriously leaving me here?" she hissed. I didn't answer. Outside, the flashlights began moving again, faster this time. I could now see silhouettes emerging through the darkness, tall men wearing heavy jackets and work boots climbing the hill toward the gate without saying a word. No laughter, no conversation, just silence. That terrified me more than anything. Every survival instinct in my body finally snapped awake. I canceled the ride immediately. The woman cursed under her breath and violently shoved the door open. Before getting out, she leaned down toward my window one last time and smiled. Not a normal smile, a horrible stretched grin that didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. The moment she stepped out, I slammed the car into reverse and spun around so fast my tires sprayed dirt everywhere. I flew back down the private road, barely able to see through the darkness. Branches scraped against the sides of my car, while the GPS completely lost signal. Then suddenly, thud! Something slammed beneath the rear tire. For one horrifying second, I thought I had run somebody over. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I kept speeding through the winding road until I finally burst back onto the main highway, breathing so hard it felt like my chest would explode. Only then did I notice the car pulling violently to one side. My rear tire was shredded,
completely destroyed. I made it to a gas station several miles away before finally stopping under the bright lights. My entire body was trembling as I stepped out to inspect the damage. That's when I saw it. Several thick, rusted nails lodged deep into the tire. Not random nails. They had been hammered through a piece of wood, like some kind of homemade spike trap. And suddenly, that horrible smile on the woman's face replayed inside my head.
I sat in that gas station parking lot for almost an hour, pretending to change the tire while constantly looking over my shoulder. Every pair of headlights that passed by made my heart race. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Was it all planned? I sat in that gas station parking lot for almost an hour, pretending to change the tire while constantly looking over my shoulder. Every pair of headlights that passed by made my heart race. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Was it all planned? The more I thought about it, the worse it became. The woman had intentionally requested pickup from an isolated dirt road instead of her actual address. Then she guided me even deeper into private property, hidden far from the highway. And somehow, right near the gate where those men were waiting, my tire ended up shredded by a trap placed perfectly across the road. It couldn't be coincidence. At least, that's what my gut kept telling me. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That I got scared by some creepy people in the woods? That I saw Nazi signs and felt unsafe? There wasn't enough proof for anyone to take seriously. So eventually, I drove home in silence while the desert sky slowly turned gray with sunrise. But things didn't end there. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those flashlights slowly climbing the hill toward my car. I saw the bullet-ridden signs, the swastikas, the motionless figures standing in the darkness. And worst of all, her smile. That unnatural smile she gave me right before I escaped. A few months later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for the address area where I had dropped her off. Buried deep in local forums were stories about violent extremist groups holding secret gatherings in remote ranch properties around Temecula's hills. Illegal weapons, disappearances, trespassers being threatened at gunpoint. One post mentioned drivers refusing to return to a certain private road after terrifying late-night encounters. The description matched exactly where I had been. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had driven through that final gate. Maybe nothing. Maybe it really was just a strange dinner party full of hateful people. Or maybe I was never supposed to leave that hill alive.
I met Vanessa during high school, and at first she didn't seem all that different from anyone else. She was quiet, a little intense, and had this strange fascination with dark and unsettling things. Horror movies, disturbing internet stories, crime documentaries, things most people would call creepy, were just normal entertainment for her. At school, people just said, "That's Vanessa being Vanessa." No one really questioned it. We all grew up in pretty sheltered environments, so when we started getting older, a lot of us experimented with edgy interests, talking about taboo topics, horror aesthetics, and pushing boundaries just to feel different. Vanessa, however, wasn't just acting edgy. She was already there. Her home life wasn't stable either. Her father was abusive and controlling, and her mother was often absent due to work. Her younger sister struggled with behavior issues, while Vanessa became the one who tried to hold everything together. On the surface, she looked functional, even responsible, but there was always something slightly off about her emotions, like she was observing people instead of truly connecting with them. She had strange hobbies too. She was obsessed with anatomy and death-related topics. She talked about becoming a mortuary or coroner like it was a normal career conversation. At the time, we thought it was just fascination, a dark interest, nothing more. But looking back now, it felt less like curiosity and more like preparation.
As we got closer in our late teens, Vanessa and I became almost inseparable. She was the one constant in a period where everything else in my life felt unstable. We spent a lot of time together after school, and I started noticing things that didn't feel normal. But back then, I ignored most of them. She didn't just like dark topics, she collected them. She would talk in detail about injury, death, and what people looked like after. At first, I assumed it was just morbid curiosity, the kind of thing teenagers exaggerate to sound different. But Vanessa never seemed to be joking. Her interest was calm, clinical, detached. At her house, she kept an unusual number of pets, far more than anyone would consider normal. It wasn't just one or two animals. It was a constant cycle of dogs, cats, rodents, reptiles, and insects, all living in a cramped suburban home. The house itself always felt chaotic, like something was barely being controlled inside it. Her father's presence made everything worse. He was strict, emotionally abusive, and unpredictable. Vanessa often described being locked in her room for long hours during her childhood, isolated and deprived of basic comfort. Over time, that environment seemed to shape her in ways none of us understood. She started showing emotional responses that didn't match situations. Sometimes she would laugh at things that weren't funny. Other times, she would go completely silent during normal conversations, like she had mentally left the room. Still, I never considered her dangerous, just different. But that perception started to slowly break the day she confessed something that made me uncomfortable for the first time. She told me she didn't just fear death. She was curious about it in a way she couldn't explain. And worse, she didn't seem disturbed by that thought at all.
As time went on, Vanessa's behavior started shifting in ways that were harder to ignore. At first, it was small things. Comments that felt a little too detailed, a little too specific. She would describe violent scenes from movies, not like she had watched them, but like she had studied them. Her curiosity wasn't emotional. It was observational, detached. One night, during a group hangout, she admitted something casually that made the room go quiet for a moment. She said she sometimes felt more connected to things that were lifeless than to people who were alive. No one really knew how to respond to that, so the conversation just moved on. Like most things involving Vanessa, people tried to normalize it. That's just her personality, they said again. But I started noticing a pattern. Whenever something disturbing came up, accidents, injuries, dead animals on the road, Vanessa would get unusually focused. Not shocked, not sad, focused. Like she was mentally recording details. Around this time, her home life also became more unstable. Her parents' conflict escalated, and tension in the household grew heavier. She often seemed exhausted, but not in a normal emotional way. It was more like she was carrying something inside her that she never talked about. She also began isolating herself more, less social interaction, more time alone. And whenever I asked if she was okay, she would give the same answer. "I'm fine, I just think too much." But the way she said it never felt reassuring. It felt like a warning she didn't fully understand herself. That was the point where I started realizing Vanessa wasn't just interested in dark things anymore. She was starting to live inside them.
By the time we reached our late teens, Vanessa's behavior had started crossing lines that were no longer easy to ignore or excuse. She began talking less about dark interests and more about control, about power, reactions, and what makes people or animals respond under pressure. At first, it sounded like abstract thinking, like philosophical curiosity, but there was an edge to it now, a sharpness. One afternoon, she showed me a video on her phone. I won't go into detail, but it involved an animal, and what disturbed me wasn't just what I saw, it was how calmly she presented it. No hesitation, no emotional reaction, just observation, like she was reviewing a science experiment. That was the first time I felt genuinely uncomfortable around her. When I questioned her, she didn't get defensive. She just said she felt bad afterward, but then added something that stayed with me. Sometimes I just want to understand what it feels like before I stop myself. It didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like curiosity fighting something weaker inside her. Around the same period, her home environment collapsed further. Her father was finally forced out of the household after years of tension and abuse, leaving behind anger and unresolved trauma that didn't just disappear. It stayed in the house, in the family, in Vanessa. But instead of things improving, something else filled the space. Silence, distance, and emotional numbness. She started spending more time alone, withdrawing from friends and responding less to normal emotional situations. It was like she was slowly disconnecting from the way other people felt the world. And the more I tried to understand her, the more I realized I was no longer sure what she was becoming.
After everything that happened, I tried to convince myself Vanessa was still just struggling with trauma, isolation, and a broken home. That it was all explainable. That she just needed time, stability, maybe help. But what came next made that harder to believe. She started showing me things she created or recorded that I can't fully describe without making it worse than it already was. What mattered wasn't just the content, it was her mindset while sharing it. There was no shock, no fear, no emotional distance from what she was doing or thinking. It was like she was testing boundaries in real time, seeing how far something could go before it became too much. When I tried to talk to her about getting help, she didn't react like someone in denial. She reacted like someone who already understood what I was worried about and didn't agree that it was a problem. "I don't think I'm like other people," she said once, very calmly. That sentence stuck with me more than anything else, because it didn't sound like insecurity. It sounded like acceptance. Around this time, I started distancing myself. Not dramatically, just slowly responding less, avoiding situations where I'd be alone with her, trying to create space without confrontation. Eventually, we stopped talking regularly. Years passed, life moved forward, but I never completely forgot the feeling she left behind. The sense that I had once been close to someone who didn't experience the world the same way most people do. Someone who didn't just think differently, but felt differently too. And sometimes I still wonder whether I saw the beginning of something I couldn't understand at the time, or whether I saw it too late.
It happened about 8 years ago in a busy suburban supermarket, the kind where Saturday mornings are always packed and everything feels slightly chaotic. I was standing in the checkout line, holding a few groceries, waiting for my turn. The place was loud, beeping scanners, carts scraping against the floor, people talking over each other. Nothing unusual, just another normal morning. In front of me was a small family, mother, father, and their young daughter sitting in the child seat of the cart. The parents were busy unloading items onto the conveyor belt, completely focused on the checkout process. The little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was sitting quietly facing backward, looking around the store with that bored, restless expression kids usually have when they're stuck waiting. Behind me, 2 men were standing in line. I didn't notice them at first, but then I felt it. That strange feeling when someone is too close or watching too long. I turned my head slightly. They were both staring, not at the shelves, not at the line, but at the little girl in the cart. Not casually, not briefly, but fixed, focused, like they had already decided something. One of them smiled and waved lightly toward her, trying to get her attention. The girl immediately looked uncomfortable and turned slightly away toward her father. I felt something shift in my stomach, something off, and I had no idea yet how far it was going to go.
The line moved slowly, but the feeling behind me didn't go away. Those 2 men stayed exactly where they were, too close for comfort, still focused on the little girl in front of me. Every time I shifted slightly, I could feel their attention tracking the cart like it was the only thing that mattered in the entire store. Then one of them stepped forward slightly, not enough to be obvious to others, but enough for me to notice. He leaned in toward the aisle gap and tried again, this time a bit more direct, smiling at the child and making small gestures as if trying to get a reaction. The girl immediately shrank back in her seat and looked toward her father again. That's when the father finally noticed. He turned around sharply. "What the hell are you doing?" he said loudly. His voice cut through the checkout noise. The store went slightly quiet for a moment, a few people glancing over. The 2 men immediately changed their expressions. The smile disappeared, replaced with a fake innocence, like nothing had happened at all. "We were just being friendly," one of them said casually. But the father wasn't buying it. "I don't know you," he said firmly. "Stay away from my daughter." The tension in the air became thick. I found myself instinctively stepping a little closer to the cart without even thinking about it, positioning myself between the men and the child. Something about the situation didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt intentional, and I realized they weren't done yet. The cashier started scanning the items, but the tension at the checkout didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. The father had turned back to his groceries, trying to act like the situation was over. But I could still feel the presence behind me. Those 2 men hadn't moved away. They were lingering, waiting, watching. And then it happened again. One of them shifted position, circling slightly so he wasn't directly behind me anymore. Now he was angled toward the end of the checkout counter, trying to get a clearer view of the cart and the little girl. The other stayed behind me, boxing me in without making it obvious. That's when it clicked in my mind. This wasn't random behavior, it was coordinated. My pulse started to rise. The girl in the cart looked more uncomfortable now, twisting slightly and clinging closer to her father's side of the cart seat. The father noticed her reaction again and turned around a second time. "What part of back off don't you understand?" he said, more aggressive now. The men raised their hands slightly, acting offended, but one of them smirked when the father turned back around. That smirk did it for me. It wasn't harmless curiosity, it wasn't confusion, it was confidence, like they were testing boundaries and seeing how far they could go before someone stopped them.
I stepped forward slightly, closer to the cart, making myself a barrier between them and the child without saying anything. That's when I noticed something even worse. One of them wasn't just watching the girl anymore. He was watching me now, like I had just become part of the situation too.
The checkout finally ended, but nobody moved the way they normally do after paying. The family packed their bags quickly, the father still glancing over his shoulder, clearly on edge. The two men stayed where they were. That alone made my stomach tighten. Most people either leave or continue shopping after checkout, but they were just standing there, pretending to browse something near the end of the aisle while clearly not looking at anything on the shelves. They were waiting. For what? I didn't know yet. I finished paying, grabbed my bags, and started walking toward the exit. That's when I felt it again. That pressure behind me, like someone had locked on to my movement. I didn't turn around immediately, but I knew they were following. Outside the supermarket, the air felt colder than it should have for a warm afternoon. People were loading groceries into cars. Kids were running around. Carts were being returned. Normal life continued like nothing had happened, but I could still feel them. And then I saw them, through the glass doors. They weren't leaving the store in different directions like normal shoppers. They were coming out together, and they were looking straight at me. At that point, my instinct kicked in. I slowed down slightly, pretending to check my phone while watching their reflection in the store window. They stopped near the entrance, talking briefly, then one of them nodded in my direction. That's when I realized I wasn't just paranoid. I was being watched for a reason, and now I was being followed. Didn't go straight to my car. Something inside me kept saying that was a bad idea. Instead, I walked through the parking lot slowly, pretending to look for something, trying to act normal while constantly checking reflections in car windows and shiny surfaces. And I saw them. They were out now. Not rushing, not hiding, just walking at a steady pace a few rows behind me, keeping distance but clearly tracking my movement. That's when the feeling shifted from uncomfortable to serious. This wasn't random anymore. It was intentional following. I changed direction slightly, walking between parked cars to break line of sight. My heart was beating faster now, but I forced myself to stay calm. Every time I turned, they adjusted. Always there, always watching. At one point, I stopped near a cart return station, pretending to fix something in my bag. Through the reflection of a car window, I saw one of them make a small gesture, like pointing, not at me directly, but toward where I was going. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to my car yet. Instead, I walked toward the supermarket entrance again, aiming for the security desk inside. And the moment I turned back toward the doors, they stopped following, just like that. No rush, no confrontation. They simply slowed down, turned slightly, and drifted away into the crowd like nothing had happened. When I finally reached security and explained everything, they took it seriously enough to check the cameras. But when I left the store leader with an escort, the parking lot was empty. No sign of them. No explanation. Just a lingering feeling that I had been watched for longer than I realized, and that I only noticed it when it was already too late to ignore.